Thank you everyone for attending today. Today we do have Ryan Hervey with us. He'll be going over planning ahead for life's tough moments. So welcome, Ryan. We're glad to have you today.
Thank you. I'm happy to get to go over this. It's weird to say I'm happy to go over life's tough moments, and we're going to talk about things that aren't really that enjoyable. But it's something that I will, if you're looking at this front screen and you see the JD after my name, that's Juris Doctorate, means I'm a lawyer, and this is what I studied in law school to be prepared for. So say that I do need to include the disclosure that I'm not giving you tax or legal advice. This is going to be just education, but really kind of want to hone in on some things that I see in our practice that I'm going to dive into a little bit as we get going, and just try to provide some experiential type of things on those tough moments that would prepare people for the future. So I do want to just dive into this thing. Welcome to the financial roadmap series. We're excited to get to do this. It's fun to prepare for these because of the opportunity it gives us to kind of revisit the themes that we're seeing all the time. And that probably points to me being fairly nerdy to be excited by looking at themes in my practice. But um, we have these discussions a whole lot, the things that we talk about on these webinars, and it's information that a lot of people need in a lot of different ways. So I'm gonna try to do my best on it. Today we're going to talk about America's planning epidemic. And so the way I've designed this particular presentation is the slides aren't going to offer you a whole lot. They're going to provide a few statistics that have some shock value, I hope. It's going to have some kind of reflection on it and some action items. So for you to maximize your experience through this webinar, I'm going to encourage you to figure out how you best take notes, whether that's grabbing a paper and a pen. The screen is not going to change a whole lot, so you're not going to have to write fast and furious. I would encourage you to highlight things that really hit home for you, either because you're seeing it happen right now, it's something you're afraid of, whatever it is that makes that thing kind of pop up in front of you, and take some notes on it. And then at the end of this, when you have notes on any of these topics, when we get to the action to dos, I would encourage you to figure out a way that you hold yourself accountable for it. So either send yourself an email, put it on your calendar, do something so that that thing that stood out during this conversation gets dealt with. And the reason, and you're going to see a ton of numbers that point to this, is Americans as a whole do not plan for these things. And so inherently, tough events points at the idea that there's going to be some level of trauma involved. And so having to make financially related decisions in the midst of trauma is not the ideal way to make financial decisions. So, some things aren't escapable. Something happens that wasn't expected, that's a little bit out of right field. But we're going to be talking about divorce issues. We're going to talk about aging. We're going to talk about death for the most part in this conversation. So, just really light topics. And without planning some of these things in advance, there's significant reason to feel like you're probably going to age. And if you don't age, you're going to die. And even when you do age, you're going to die. So we know that 2/3 of the things I'm going to talk about are going to happen for the most part. So we want to just make sure that we've done the basic hygiene related things to make sure we're ready to go.
Before you start, Ryan, so sorry.
Yeah,
If people have questions during the seminar, please use the Q&A feature and we will answer your questions at the end. Thank you.
you bet. So this is a slide. If you were on last month, you would have seen this slide from Stacy. I literally left this thing completely unchanged because it proved my point, but we're not going to talk about retirement. But 50% of Americans have less than $10,000 saved. 42% feel confident about retirement. The reason that number is so low is because they don't know what they don't know and they haven't done enough to prepare for it. and 62% don't have a written retirement plan. What's remarkable about this is as we look at the other tough events that happen in the future, I think we're more prepared for retirement than we are for the other things, which is a little bit disturbing. If you didn't get to do that talk and you have interest in it, there's your QR code. Um, that's actually one I'd probably take a picture with your phone and not try to draw that in your written notes. But it's out there. You have access to it, and if you want to go listen to Stacy talk more in depth about retirement planning, it's a fantastic webinar. So the first part of this is kind of focusing on aging and death, and I've kind of put those two things together because they go together. And we frequently see clients that are kind of having to work through these things at the same time, because if we've built a retirement plan, we have to prepare for longevity. And as humans, we don't have a very good capability of visualizing what we're going to be in the future. So we can visualize circumstances. We can kind of imagine lifestyle. I mean, Julie and I were talking about the beach picture on the opening slide, sitting out at the beach. That's not hard for us to imagine. What's difficult for us to imagine is us doing daily life as an older individual. We just aren't wired to do it. So one of the things that happens is we don't prepare for it, and a lot of times then that leads into death. There's some of you that have done a good job potentially preparing for death, but haven't necessarily prepared for the aging part of this. So we kind of want to just do these together because they go together, because death is the end of aging. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, they're interlocked. So statistics indicate that only 51% of Americans have life insurance. So what that points at to us is a massive risk gap, where there may not be enough money. And what that may look like changes on people's circumstances. So younger families or folks that have a lot of debt that still needs to be paid off, losing the income from someone could be absolutely a huge issue. It's something I've talked about with young married couples before, or younger married couples before. And it's this idea of you've built a life. It depends on two sets of finances for it to work the way it's supposed to. And now someone's died and we don't have enough money to pay for it. And I'll sit through meetings and I get it. Insurance is not a fun thing to buy. So I am not like, hey, yo, let's go insurance. This is great. It's just I'll get people in a meeting that say, I don't, they'll figure it out. Well, in a lot of cases, especially if you have kids, you've now left a surviving spouse in a situation where they may have to rush into a relationship just to be able to meet financial goals and to be able to do life the way that, it is anywhere close to the standard of living that they're used to. And that is a potential issue. I didn't throw the statistic in here with it, is that even though only 51% of Americans have life insurance, it's considered that maybe 60 to 70% of people are underinsured. So even those people that have it say, oh, I've got it through work. Well, if you're 50 years old with a planned retirement at age 65, and you have 3 times your salary at work's life insurance policy, you've got 15 years of income that we had to deal with, and you've only got 3 years of life insurance that replaces it. So that becomes an issue. The other place we see this is sometimes with an estate that gets left, is a parent may leave an estate to a child, and it's a wonderful estate, maybe a family farm, it may be a family business, it may be something along those lines. And it's something that we want to keep, but there's no catch. And so at death, there's bills that that become due. There's probate costs. There may be estate taxes related or state level death taxes, and there's no money. And so it's an issue that needs to be addressed because it creates a disruption in the foundation of someone's finances. So, and I'm not saying that everyone needs life insurance. I have clients that don't need life insurance. But it's certainly a risk that needs to be addressed. And it's also important to find someone that you can talk to about this openly and honestly. I mean, I've sat through early in my law days when I was in a law firm environment. I got pitched on life insurance all the time, and it felt gross. So, in a perfect world, you build that financial plan and you figure out where life insurance is needed, and you figure out the most cost effective way to address that risk. That's at a simple level. The next piece of this is long-term care insurance. And if you think that buying life insurance isn't fun, you should see the costs of long-term care insurance. It's every client that I have ever talked to about it ends up having a sticker shock reaction. Some people run for the hills immediately after that, and we don't ever talk about it again because we've addressed it and it wasn't for them. Other clients, swallow hard and then start thinking about what they're trying to protect. And so in this situation, 4% of Americans over the age of 50 have long-term care insurance. Generally, I would argue that you probably don't need it before age 50. So 4% is probably a pretty accurate picture of who actually owns this across the board. But 70% of people over 65 will need long-term care. And if you haven't had to deal with this with a parent, or a grandparent or someone in your life that you're close to, the cost of long-term care can be massive. So I have a client who was caregiving for their spouse, and they were doing the lion's share of it. On a monthly basis, we distributed $4,000 a month, and that covered their spending, that covered costs for their regular life. When they had a health event occur, even though one spouse was acting as the caretaker, their monthly draw from us more than quadrupled. So they went from $4,000 a month coming out to us sending them $17,000 a month to pay for care related things while a spouse was still involved in the caretaking. So they were able to withstand it, but they went from having enough money where I felt comfortable that they could cover 20 years of life together at their normal run rate, to the risk if they would have gone through 17,000 a month, they would have ran out of money in about 18 months. So they had no insurance to help with it. And tell you what, if you think it's stressful taking care of a spouse that's got health issues, doing that while having this black cloud overhanging you saying you're going to run out of money, is altogether a different level of stress. So in this case, the spouse that was ill ended up passing fairly quickly, and that was an enormous bailout on the financial side. But it's a weird situation to be stuck almost hoping that your spouse passes soon, just so that it doesn't capsize the entire thing. So I encourage my clients, all of them, to look at long-term care insurance, just so that they've seen it, just so that I can say, that we've talked about it. You're making the choice not to do this, and not to figure out where this fits in your world, because I don't want to be responsible down the road when those costs hit and we haven't talked about it. So it's something that I tend to require all of my clients to look at, even though not all of them end up having it. The last part of this, 76% of people do not have a will, which is the most basic death plan that there is. A will just directs your assets towards someone and allows a probate court to oversee the process. Again, we tend to point our clients other ways. We like to use revocable trusts. It doesn't, I mean, if you have a $500,000 estate, total estate that passes through probate at 4% fees, which is generally the minimum, that's a $20,000 probate bill. When having a revocable trust, which would have allowed us to avoid all of that, generally cost 2,500 to 5,000, depending on the level of planning we do. So again, this is one of those deals where the reason it doesn't get done is because people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to make decisions about that world. They don't want to think about being gone. They don't want to think about the effect. And the result is they put people in a really bad position sometimes to have to figure out what's going to happen next. So what do we do with it? Um, I would say that my clients who have done the best at estate planning generally do so because someone before them made estate planning choices that impacted them. So either the previous generation did it right and they appreciate how smoothly that went. They've heard horror stories, they know how bad it can be. And so they're making the decisions for the next generations to do it right on their end too. I also get people that are motivated to do things right because of how badly it went for them. And they had to clean up a massive mess. You know, sometimes depending on the situation, being an executor, there are weeks and sometimes months where it feels like a full-time job that you're doing in addition to your full-time job. And so when parents pass and leave things in a mess, it's incredibly stressful. So I would consider, think of that as a motivating factor. Is think of your experiences, think about whether or not you've been involved in one of these and whether it's gone smoothly or whether it's gone poorly. And then think about the future. Is what do you want future generations to experience from you? And it's going to be part of your legacy. If you do your planning right, it's smooth. People grieve on time when they have support. When we don't do this right, grieving gets deferred because the business of death takes the precedent. And then by the time it's time to grieve, the support structures are often gone. So there are ways to do this that are better. And if you care about the future generations, doing your planning intentionally is really valuable. Secondly, I encourage you to visualize who needs protection. So stop thinking about this as necessarily an insurance conversation or a product conversation, and just visualize that if you were gone today, who would who would need things because you're gone. And that's really what the insurance is designed to do. Is it a spouse who would suddenly end up with bills beyond their ability to pay them? Is it kids that you've envisioned a life for them, or grandkids even that you've envisioned a life for, that you're going to have to support, where all of a sudden you're gone and the support goes away too. So when you start thinking of this more of, or who needs protected and what do they need, that's the better way to figure out the insurance quotient. If the answer is none, it's everything's paid off. There's plenty of income. I took care of my kids by doing X, Y, or Z in their history. They don't need anything more than me. They're adults. They've got great jobs, whatever. The answer may be that no one needs protection. If no one needs protection, you probably don't need life insurance. But if you do, then we need to address it and figure out how you do that most effectively. The same thing is generally true on the long-term care insurance side. Is visualize who needs protection. This one you get to be part of the equation. If you end up in a Medicaid environment and you're going to rely on Medicaid to pay for long-term care, generally you get sent where there's a bed. And if a married couple relies on Medicaid, you will both get sent to where there's beds, which may not be the same place. So leaving that to chance, and maybe that's an okay outcome for you. I get it. I've been around marriages where they're probably better off being in separate places. But if if you want to take control of that outcome, then you need to figure out how you're going to pay for it. And again, is it our assets? Can we go through as part of our plan and figure out how we're going to pay for this deal? And if we can't do it, then we need to figure out what we supplement it with. And that's where the insurance side of this ends up fitting. But again, both of those, both the death side and the long-term care side, should really both be decisions that are tied to a written financial plan, which I pointed out in that first slide, that a lot of Americans don't have. So I very, very much encourage you to have a written financial plan. Consult with elder and or estate planning attorneys. There is not a guarantee that both of these exist in the same person. So there are estate planning attorneys who aren't experts in elder law, and there are people that focus on elder law that aren't estate planning attorneys. I would say by and large, because aging and death come together so frequently and so closely, that a lot of times you're probably going to be covered with one individual. But if you're going to end up doing a will, I would ask us elder law related questions when you're in there. What do they know? Where is their expertise? What have they seen? And kind of start to figure out if that's a person that you can rely on, because sometimes the elder law side speeds up really quickly and you have to make decisions quickly. So knowing where your resources are becomes very valuable. And then lastly, the action step of make sure everything's cleaned up. So anything that isn't covered by will and or trust, like a beneficiary designation, the payable on death, transfer on death that you would have at a bank or with certain financial investment accounts, just make sure those are updated. Are those aligned with what they should be now? A lot of times, we'll set this up with clients and they do the original beneficiary designation and then, they just don't revisit it. And, we'll bring it up in meetings, those kind of things. The other thing is if you've been a part of a company and you've moved, you got hired somewhere new, you moved your previous 401k over to their 401k. Just know that that beneficiary designation from your previous company almost certainly didn't go over to your new company. So you'll want to go back into your own 401k plan and make sure that beneficiary designation is updated. All right, before I hit divorce, is there any questions on death and aging that we want to cover?
There are no questions in the queue.
Awesome. All right. So divorce. Similar problems, right? But this one's a little bit more difficult in that, we know that we're going to age. If we're alive, we're going to age. And if we're alive, we're going to die. Those two things we know for sure. Divorce isn't quite as clear. So there are a lot of statistics out there that get thrown around. The reality is approximately 40% of first marriages end in divorce. Divorce is highly disruptive financially because we're having to pull finances apart, and there's a lot of decisions that tend to get made together that now have to be undone. When a divorce occurs, to cover lifestyle, there needs to be usually about 30% more income. So that's an average of men and women. The reality is in a divorce situation, women generally end up needing 40% more money, and men generally need about 20% more money. And a lot of times that is because certain family structures end up falling more on the woman, who also still traditionally tends to find some inequality in pay in the workforce. So as a whole, both parties need more money, right? You've got a separate place you have to pay for. You've got separate obligations that you have to pay for. At least in Iowa, thankfully, we've gotten rid of the rule where you were forced to pay for a third of college, even though people that were married weren't forced to pay for a third of a kid's college each. But there are costs that come that used to be blended that are now separated, and it requires more money. So when we get to this part of things, lifestyle becomes very difficult. And I've seen clients go through this, and it's difficult. And there's usually a kind of a handful of years, 2 to 5, where they really are looking for balance because it was so disruptive. So, understanding that before a divorce process starts is looking at your expenses and understanding where am I going to be able to cut back in order to pay for this 30% addition that I'm going to have towards my expenses. And then lastly, most divorces take 6 to 12 months. If you are in Iowa, it is a minimum of 30, of 90 days. So you've got 3 months, 90 days. It's required. It's built into the structure. You can't get it done faster than that. A lot of states have what they call cooling off periods when people have the ability to undo this process before it's complete. And so they've built in a minimum. But with most divorces taking that long, preparation matters. And the longer it takes, the more you're paying attorneys, the more you're paying court costs. So, having your ducks in a row allow you to do this as efficiently as possible. And that's really kind of one of our goals from this is to be efficient in this process. So, so what's next? The hardest part about divorce is that when you enter the divorce process, you've done so because somebody's been aggrieved, and maybe both parties have been. And so there's a desire for the divorce process to bring about justice, right? We're in a courtroom. We've been hurt. We want satisfaction for the pain that's been caused. But the way divorce structures are set up, it's really a property settlement. This isn't the place where you go in order to get healed from the pain of going through a divorce. So as such, it's really about being organized. It's about understanding financial structures. What we're doing in the courtroom is separating property and trying to do it in an equitable fashion. Justice has to come from other places. It just doesn't come from this. So first and foremost, going in, you've got to have that mindset. The longer you think you're seeking justice for the pain you've experienced, whether it's self-inflicted or the other party inflicted it, in either way, the more it's justice focused, the more you end up paying lawyers. So getting to that mental mindset of we're going to be about the property side of this and not the emotional side of this, it will make the process work better. Additionally, there are two types of attorneys and processes. Depending on where you live, these may be more or less, capable of being found. But there's been a growth over the last decade in what's known as collaborative divorce. And this is when one attorney represents both sides and they both agree that they're going to be able to do this without a lot of conflict. And this works really well in situations where there's the divorce is based on people maybe just wanting to take lives in different directions, and it necessarily hasn't been explosive or a lot of anger and hurt involved. The collaborative process tends to preserve harmony better, especially if there's kids involved. It can be really good. But again, that focuses on those are two people that are kind of understanding. We need to have our properties separated so that we can go our separate ways and not hate each other by the time this is done. If you've gotten to the we hate each other already by the time it starts, you're probably going to use your traditional method. And that's going to have structures that are in place to get to the property separation side, while recognizing that both parties don't agree on a lot of things. So in preparation for doing either one of those, you need to have an inventory of your assets. You need to know how much you're making. You need to know how much your spouse is making. You need to know what accounts exist for both of you. It's going to be asked of you, so doing so in advance is really helpful. If you're the one that's thinking about filing for divorce and your spouse doesn't know that you've gotten to that place of considering it, I would encourage you to create the inventory now, before it's on a radar, just from the standpoint of you're going to get the cleanest look at what's out there. I would also tell you to stay clean. So, and by that I mean don't get clever about how you're going to hide assets. So I get that question from clients sometimes, which is kind of crazy since I represent a married couple together that I would choose one over the other and give that kind of feedback. But the assets are going to get found and it's not going to help you. So there's going to be, unless you're willing to perjure yourself, move things offshore. I mean, there's a lot of steps you'd have to take to truly get these assets hidden. And for the most part, it's not going to be worth the cost of what you've done to try to do it. So when you go into this, it's gonna require a level of integrity. And I understand, you look at that other spouse thinking, man, I don't trust them. Well, that's why the inventory is there, right? Things start disappearing, joint accounts start having weird things happen. There's going to be a paper trail of all of it. We live in a world where there's generally a paper trail for just about everything. And in this case, that's beneficial. It reduces the chances of someone getting away with something that's unfair. The last thing to do is, consult a divorce attorney. If you think collaborative is a way you can go, consult with them. Figure out what that process looks like. Find out more details. See if you think it's really going to fit. And if you don't think so, if you think it's traditional, then you probably want to get involved with a divorce attorney sooner than later, and start to come up with what your strategies are going to be going forward. And they're going to have specific things they want you to do, and as such, you're going to want to do them and follow their directions, because that's your best chance of having kind of a best outcome. That's all I have with those with the divorce side of things. So before we get to the question and answer, this is a QR code to get to us. You see my email address is there. I'm happy to speak a little bit more in depth. It's hard to pack half an hour into some pretty heavy topics, but hopefully, again, they're designed to raise flags in your mind over things that need to be discussed, and give you some empowerment to seek out answers on those things. So most of us work in this space in some area. If not, we'll get you to a colleague to help start to address the issues that you would face either going through the preparation for aging, death, or divorce. All right, so we've got some time for question and answers. That remarkably, I tried to do as few slides as possible to make that as short as possible, and I still went longer than I wanted to. So if I haven't, bored everyone to death, I'd love to answer some questions.
All right. We have a question. First steps before meeting with an attorney.
Lisa, I don't know for sure if we're looking at a state attorney, an aging elder law attorney, or a divorce attorney, but in all cases, okay, for a trust, perfect.
Yep.
Generally, the answer is going to be true across the board, is knowing what you have is really important. So having an inventory of what your assets are, what your income is. One of the things that we do with our clients in my office is start to think about what would you want to have happen if you were not here. So what are you going to do for kids? What are you going to do for grandkids? Would you do special things? When you go to meet with a trust attorney, attorneys are going to be focused on getting things done as quickly as possible, right? That's where their margin is giving you the most basic document possible that still covers your needs, but they're not spending their time encouraging you to be creative. So to the extent that there needs to be creativity because you need to incentivize kids with a certain behavior, you have family dynamics that this kid needs to be treated in a different way than this kid's treated. Like, those are all things that you need to kind of think about in advance, and be ready to discuss, because the attorney is going to ask questions that will trigger the opportunity for you to describe some family things that you want. But if you're not ready for that mentally, and you haven't thought through your family dynamics and what the needs are and what you want to accomplish, they're not going to spend a lot of time digging there. So that would be my encouragement, is think about what problems need to be solved, how you want to do it, and with a trust, a revocable trust, which is what almost everyone on this call is going to need, is a revocable trust, which means it's changeable. Is you can do almost anything under the sun inside of that thing. If you can think it, it can be written and created for the most part. So that is that is where my encouragement would be for being prepped for that meeting.
Next question. Is there a way for kids to get parents on long-term care insurance at age 80 plus?
Generally not. Um, the the sweet spot for getting long-term care insurance is in your 50s. Once you start hitting kind of age 65, if I could draw a chart, it's, the cost increase go like this, and then you hit 65 and it kind of looks like a plane that's taken off. It gets extremely expensive. I don't even know if they provide policies at that age. I've never checked on it. But generally, you would target that in kind of your 50s up to age about 60 before it gets pretty cost prohibitive.
All right, perfect. All right, next one. How to provide for your child if you pass before they reach 18. Guardianship, especially when they have older siblings that you do not want them to go to.
Um, Hard situation that there's not going to be a real great answer for generally. So what I would do in this case, usually is you want to have a revocable trust and you name a trustee. That's the person who's going to oversee the financial side of things. And then you name a guardian that you want that minor child to be with. The guardian and the trustee do not need to be the same person. And if there's any chance that you have any distrust in the process at all, I would encourage you to make them different people. Hopefully, people that generally get along, but different people gives kind of a checks and balances structure to this setup. If you don't do a revocable trust, property will go into conservatorship, which is what states call um, the overseeing the assets, while guardianship is overseeing the person or the body. Um, so you'd have both relationships, and so um, conservatorships have to report to the court on an annual basis, and generally for larger expenses. In some cases, if you don't trust the people that are going to be involved in the money side, you don't mind it being a conservatorship. It's more expensive because you're paying court costs, but it protects money better. If you trust the person in charge of the money, then the trustee would be a better choice. And you kind of lay out in a trust or in a kind of a statement of intent. You could write separate from a trust on how you want them to proceed in terms of distributing money to the guardian to take care of kids. But that is a complex question that is really going to be very specific to your circumstances. Mhm.
Next one. We have had wills created and everything is stated to pass to the spouse if one of us passes before the other. Is it recommended that this goes through a trust versus just passing to avoid probate?
So at the spousal level, having a will is generally going to be fine. I'm assuming, so there's a couple of assumptions built into that the house is owned jointly, because when one of you dies as an operation of law, the other spouse will take it 100%. It doesn't go through probate. Most accounts are set up to automatically pass to a spouse, even if you didn't go in and do the payable on death or the beneficiary designation. A lot of those are built just to go directly to a spouse. So generally, a will is fine at a spousal level without there being an issue. Very few things end up going through probate when a spouse dies. What changes the answer is if what the next generation looks like. What happens after the survivor of you is gone becomes an important one. Is if we've got kids and we want to maximize what they're going to get financially, then the trust becomes more powerful because we avoid probate costs. The other side I would say is if age is a consideration where you're young, um, if you leave everything to your spouse and you're 30 years old and you've got little kids and they end up getting remarried, which is there's a decent chance of that if you leave someone at age 30, you if they get married and you've left everything to them, theoretically, all of those assets now are going to be commingled with their new spouse, which may not benefit your children. So that's where a trust in terms of taking care of the next generation could be important to make sure that the things you left were there to support your spouse. But to the extent that they're not going to be used for support, is those assets then will go to your heirs as opposed to being part of, the marital assets between your spouse and their new spouse after you're gone.
Well, thank you everyone for joining. If you have additional questions, you do have our contact information, and there will be a short survey at the end, so you can also contact us that way. But otherwise, I hope everyone has a great day, and we look forward to for you joining us next month.